Hi, welcome everyone. I am Chris Herman, a library associate at the Youth Services Department of the Bowie branch. And we want to thank everyone, teens and all, for coming to our Team Pride Lounge author event. We'll be having Tom Ryan and hopefully Leah Johnson, but she's working through some technical difficulties. So for right now, let me introduce Tom. Tom Ryan is an award-winning author of books for young readers. His books have been Junior Library Guild and American Library Association Rainbow List selections and have been included on several best of year lists. He was a 2017 Lambda Literary Fellow in Young Adult Fiction. His 2019 release, Keep This to Yourself, was the recipient of the 2020 Arthur Ellis Award, the 2020 ITW Thriller Award, and the 2021 Ann Connor Brimer Award, and was also nominated for the Amy Mathers Teen Book Award and the John Spray Mystery Award. It was also chosen by Globe and Mail as one of the Globe 100 books that shaped 2019. His young adult mystery, I Hope You're Listening, is a finalist for the 2021 Lambda Award for Best LGBTQ Mystery. Tom, his husband, and their dog live in Nova Scotia. Hi, Tom, welcome.
Hi, how are you doing? Great to be
Doing
here.
well. So I just gave everyone your short author bio, but to update it, at the end, we noted that I Hope You're Listening was a finalist for the 2021 Lambda Award for Best LGBTQ Mystery, but as you were telling us prior to this, it won the Lammy this year, correct?
Yes, it did on June 1st. It's my first Lammy nomination. I did not expect to win. It was a great way to kick off Pride Month. So yeah, I'm still kind of floating on air about that.
That's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And for anyone that doesn't know, the Lambda Literary Award is kind of the big LGBTQ plus book award out there in the United States and North America.
Yeah, it was a real thrill. It was a great, really well-produced award show. I mean, I think we've all been watching almost everything that had been in the real world, all these awards, galas, shows, that sort of thing. This kind of thing is happening online. And the organizers did a great job of keeping it kind of lively and exciting.
Cool, excellent. So I guess to start off, it looks like Leah might be coming in too. It looks like
great.
Hi, Leah.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, how are you doing today?
I would be better. My publicist did not give me the link, and so at the last minute, I was like scrambling, trying to figure out how to get here. But we figured it out. We made it.
Awesome. Welcome.
Thank you.
Can I read a short bio for everyone, or?
Yeah.
Okay. So Leah Johnson is a writer, editor, and eternal Midwesterner, currently moonlighting as a New Yorker. She is a graduate of the Fiction Writing MFA program at Sarah Lawrence College and currently teaches there in their undergraduate writing program. And Leah is a 2021 Lambda Literary Emerging Writers Fellow, whose work has been published or is forthcoming in BuzzFeed, Autostraddle, Catapult, and Electric Literature, among others. When she's not writing, you can usually find her on Twitter, ranting about pop culture and politics. You Should Come See Me in a Crown is her first novel. And just for everyone out there, Leah's and Tom's. So I had some questions for you both, and then some questions about your books individually, and then definitely we hope if any teens want to pop in and ask questions, you are more than welcome. So I guess first off, what inspired you both to write for LGBTQ teens?
Tom, you
Do you want to take it away? You go ahead, Leah. You kick us off.
Yeah, so when I was coming up, I was raised in Indiana, central Indiana in particular. And so I was raised around a lot of cornfields and also a lot of white folks. And so I didn't see a lot of books that reflected the experience that I was having, where I was a Black girl navigating what it means to be raised by a single mom in a community where a lot of people don't look like me. And so I knew when I wanted to be a writer, what I wanted to do was speak directly to like 16, 17-year-old versions of myself. Um, and so when I started writing my first book, it felt really organic, really natural to me to like set the book in a town similar to, towns near where I grew up. And also I should say, like, in 2018, which is when I sold You Should See Me in a Crown, like, a study came out by CCBC, which is like sort of a book think tank, and they had done the research of all the diverse titles that had come out the 3 years prior to 2018, and they added up all the numbers of traditionally published like YA novels, and out of 20 books that had a Black girl protagonist, out of all the thousands of books that are published, there was only 20 with a Black girl protagonist. And over the course of 3 years, there was only one in which the girl was Black and queer. And so even in my adulthood, there were very few books that existed that reflected back to me any semblance of an experience that was similar to mine. And so it felt like the only thing to do was write what I know. And that's this,
I would say I had as different as our experiences have been, some of the things that Leah just mentioned resonated with me. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I'm in my 40s, and I grew up in a really small town in a very rural part of Eastern Canada in Nova Scotia, hockey obsessed, really tiny fishing village on the coast, at a time when queer representation was not even close to where it has come over the past 10, 15 years. And it was more or less impossible to find a book with a protagonist that, reflected me back at myself. And so when I started writing seriously around 2010, I knew that I wanted to write YA. And by that point, I'd been through my own trials and tribulations. I'd come out, I'd met a guy, life was great personally, but I still recognize that even as recently as 2010, there were not very many books about LGBTQ teens. There just weren't out there. There were some. I mean, never say there was nothing. I mean, there's been stuff since as far back as the 70s, but there's so few and far between that I decided that if I was going to authentically write about teens, I needed to kind of write about the person that I'd been and the person that I would have liked to have seen in books when I was younger and reading. So I wrote a couple of books, 2012 and 2013. My first two books came out. They were straightforward contemporary YA with, my protagonists were young, gay, cisgender white males. And at the time, they were among a very small number of books that were coming out. Most queer books at that time were coming out narratives. And, like I say, they were not especially diverse. And so, I had a great experience releasing those books, but as I got out and started talking to teens and started listening to people in high schools, at gay straight alliances, LGBTQ youth groups, I was hearing more and more about, from young people who still wanted to see more diversity, more representation. And so I think that over the past 10 years or so, it's been encouraging to see how far we've come, but, the statistics Leah just mentioned, I think really reflect that there's still a long way to go. So, hopefully lots of young voices are coming out and picking up the flame. But I will say that writing for queer teens and having them respond to the material is really rewarding.
Yeah, I love the James Baldwin quote that you opened with, Leah. The place in which I'll fit will not exist until I make it. And kind of, as you said, you didn't see the books out there that represented your full experience, so you wrote it into the world. But as you said, it's publishing industry, about who runs the publishing industry, which I think they did a survey about 2 years ago, and it's still 90, I think at the time it was like 96% still predominantly white. So it's the gatekeeping definitely needs to change.
Truly. One thing Tom said that I really I'm thinking a lot about, I recently did an event with David Levithan, and I grew up like loving David's books, and I didn't know I was queer at the time, but maybe that was part of why I like found so much value in them. Like, oh, Boy Meets Boy is so much fun. I wonder why I'm so obsessed with it. But I did an event with him recently where he said that like his generation is the last generation of like queer writers that don't have elders to point to, of a lot of books that had come out that sort of informed the way that they understood what it means to write queer narratives, but specifically queer narratives for young people. And so to Tom's point, like, I'm really excited to be a part of this continuum of queer writers that just continues to diversify the canon and diversify what it looks like to tell stories about, queer teenagers. And hopefully my generation of Black queer women writers are the last where we look to the generations that came before us and can only identify a couple of traditionally published Black queer women in this genre. So I'm excited. It feels like we're moving forward. I mean, very slowly. It took a long time, but we're getting there.
It was a one step forward, two steps back, but always going step by step. Yeah.
Right. We're going somewhere. Whether it's forward.
I guess that segues to another question. Are there any kind of touchstone queer books that you all look back on? Or is there anything like forthcoming by other writers that you're really excited about? Sorry, it's kind of a two-parter.
As far as looking back, I can say that I primarily write mystery thrillers, and a book that had a huge influence on me was The Talented Mr. Ripley and the whole Ripley series by Patricia Highsmith, who was an out queer, very problematic in many ways woman, but who wrote some incredible groundbreaking thrillers that they weren't YA, but I found them when I was 15, 16, and they had a big impact on me because Ripley is a queer character, and seeing that kind of story, when you're used to reading a certain genre and you've only seen a certain type of character represented in it, and then you find something where there is a gay male and you're kind of a closeted gay male, that has a big impact. So that would be the book that probably had the biggest impact on me as a queer thriller writer. I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, I didn't come out until my early 20s, and so like I didn't really have access to queer YA until then, because when I was a kid I grew up in a really religious household, and like you couldn't bring queer stuff into the house, like that was a no-go. And so the books that had like the biggest impact on me were books that I read when I was like YA novels that I ended up reading when I was grown. And so Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda was like hugely important and influential to me. There's so many, and I talk about them all the time. And so anybody who's ever seen me do this before, sorry, but I have to let them know. It's Simon versus The God Box by Alex Sanchez, Miseducation of Cameron Post by Emily Danforth, and Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Alida Science are like my go-tos. Anytime anybody's ever like, what does YA mean to you? Those books are what YA means to me.
Yeah. Cool. So what does Pride Month mean to both of you as queer writers and writers for the younger generation?
Yeah, I think Pride is changing quite a bit. I think every year the way people think about Pride and the way we talk about it is evolving. So like, this is my unrelated to books answer. This is just like general Pride take. And that's like one, like obviously the Pride has been co-opted by like corporations and by big business, and they're finding ways to like speak directly to queer people. Yes, honey, gag me, like all this like just really not great pandering that's going on. But that said, how cool is it that like it's totally normal to talk about queer stuff on such like a massive scale now, and like people are actually trying to target things to you instead of acting like we don't exist. So I think that's very cool. But the theoretical answer is like pride is really about taking ownership of all the things that like so many people in the world are going to try to tell you to be ashamed of, and being able to like stand in those truths wholly and do it without fear or shame. That's pride.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd echo that. Especially, it can be really easy these days, in particular, to be a bit cynical about pride as an event, because it has been so co-opted and commercialized. But 100%, what you said, Leah, about how far we've come, the fact that we are being pandered to, there is a bit of optimism in that. I mean, like I said, I graduated high school in '95, small town, terrified of my sexuality, could not get away from my town fast enough because I knew I was not safe. I knew I could not be myself around the people who, looking back now, there's all the people back then who I would have been afraid of are, fully fine with, queerness and supportive of queer rights. But it was a different world only a couple of decades ago. And, the thought of actually participating in a pride parade back in the mid 90s for me would have been unthinkable. I would have been, full anxiety that a camera would have picked me up and beamed me back to my hometown. And then 2 years ago, my old high school, very small high school, 50 grads, had its first Pride Festival in the school, fully participated in by all the student body. And for me, I think it's about progress. It's about, a sense of self and a sense of safety, the being able to be yourself and be comfortable in your own skin without the sense that the world is going to come in and attack you for that. And beyond that, it's also, honestly, it's about community. It's an opportunity for people to get together and be with other queer people in a space that is supportive and safe and joyful. And, it doesn't last all year, but the sentiment is there for long after, June rolls up and we move on into the rest of the year. There's a lot of excitement and optimism that comes from Pride Month.
Yeah, so I really did love that both of you had novels where the queer teen main characters, they had really loving but also conflicted relationships within their own family and friend groups. So I was curious, Leah, your main character, Liz Lady, is a Black queer girl, and she is surrounded by family and friends that love her, and she loves them. But you also take her on a journey where those relationships shift and alter, and it kind of builds with Liz coming into her own building sense of self-confidence and self-pride. And so was that something you were consciously aiming for, or did it just come kind of more organically?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for that question. I really appreciate getting to talk about this, actually, because it's one of those things that I think is easy to forget the further away from the self I've become that I was when I wrote You Should See Me in a Crown. And when I wrote this book, I was not out to my family. I was out to the select friends, but that was mostly because they had like met me when I was queer, and I was also away from my hometown, so I could be whoever I wanted to be when I was around them, and nobody expected anything else other than that. But there was still a huge part of me that wasn't totally comfortable with my sexuality in every room I was in. And so part of what was happening when I wrote You Should See Me in a Crown is I was writing a wish fulfillment story. Like, this is the future that I hope would be possible for me, that I didn't know or believe necessarily that could ever belong to me. But I wanted to give that to Liz, because if it couldn't happen to me, then I wanted to at least see that it could happen to somebody else, or give that story to another, young Black queer girl. And so, that's what it was. It was like, I wanted a family who would embrace Liz. And their biggest concern was like whether or not they could still eat at Chick-fil-A. Like that was the kind of coming out I wanted to give her. Because when I thought about coming out, it was all like fire and brimstone, like shouting matches, get out of the house, like you're condemned. which ultimately isn't what happened. My mom was incredibly welcoming and loving and tender, and I came out over a plate of like barbecue wings at Dallas Barbecue in Times Square. Like, it was actually really dramatic, but very nice. And so, the story gave me that. It gave me the freedom and the belief that, like, should I come out, I'm still going to have a community of people that love me. And so, yeah, I think a lot of my journey sort of aligned with Liz's in a lot of ways.
That's really beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll definitely admit I teared up and cheered in both of your novels. So awesome.
Thank you.
I love that. I love people cry.
Right. Every time somebody, like, a lot of people tell me they cried when they read the book, and then I'm like, I meant it was supposed to be so happy. It was like, I was like,
well,
yes,
happy tears though, like sure, happy, like you awesome tears, yeah.
Yeah, the good kind of tears.
So just looking in the chat, O says hello, Leah and Tom. They agree that even growing up in a liberal town in the early 2000s, they could not dream of the kind of visibility that the community has today. It is a double-edged sword, but it's moving to see the sense of self and sense of safety, as Tom said.
Yeah. I also want to say, like, I was not to blow up the spot, Tom. I was born like when Tom was graduating high school, and so, like, it's so funny to me to hear you say, not funny, it's terrible, but, like, it's interesting to hear you say, like, oh, this was my experience when I was in high school and, like, terrified of coming out, and then here I came, down the line a little bit, and I still was experiencing a lot of those same feelings. And I think, like, in a lot of ways, like, Gen Z, for instance, has a lot more access to community and information than either of us had. But still, I think, like, there are so many pockets of, the world, the country, whatever, in which, like, queer kids, it's still not easy for them to come out. And so, yeah, it's really interesting to watch the ways that things have, like, gotten much better, but also have not changed at all in some places.
Yeah, and I think something that I've been thinking a lot about lately, I've been writing for about 11 years, and I've been going into high schools from the first book, and I have seen things change in the types of schools that I'm invited into. I tend to be invited into liberal schools in areas that have teachers or librarians who want to have someone queer come into the school, and you can get sort of maybe a false sense of reality from that, because there are still lots of schools in religious areas, in more rural conservative areas that don't extend those invitations. I think that still happens, and there's sort of a silencing that can be hard to recognize. But I have seen a shift in the schools that I'm invited into, where, back in 2010, 2011, you would see a little group of queer kids, and they'd often kind of come up to you quietly afterwards and talk about the book and say, I really enjoyed your novel. These are some other titles I've been reading. Lately, it seems to be big groups of queer teens who are really enthusiastic about their identities and their friendships, and they hang out in big, diverse clusters with various sexual and gender identities, and it's great. It's so exciting to see it. But at the same time, something that I'm starting to see in the culture that really concerns me is that I think that we've shifted really far over, culturally, we've come a long way when it comes to, battling homophobia, but transphobia is a big and a growing issue. I think that it's still considered okay in a lot of areas to be transphobic, and that debate is happening in public all the time these days. I see it every time I check out the news. There's some sort of a trans-related issue where there are people saying things that I remember, similar sorts of rhetoric from back when I was a teen. People used to say stuff about gay and lesbian and bisexual people. They're saying those things about transgender people now. And what concerns me the most is that, it's awful from all angles, but to put myself in those shoes, to kind of be brought back to the way I felt when I was a teen and hearing those kinds of awful, damaging messages, and to know that there are so many trans kids and teens out there who are hearing this stuff on a daily basis. It's really frustrating to me. And I think that we all kind of have, as much as we've come a long way in so many ways, I think that there's, there are still battles to be fought. And I'm immensely concerned for the emotional and psychological well-being of these kids who are hearing bad things about themselves every day. So that's a little rant. It's just something that's been on my mind lately because I feel like history is repeating itself, and I don't like it.
Yeah, I mean, again, and not to get on too much of a similar soapbox, but I think it's where I was talking with a friend earlier today, and we were just saying that unfortunately it seems like it's coming from some corners of the LGBT community at times, which seems even worse and incomprehensible. But it's easier for division to sow than to sometimes like bind to come together.
You know what? While we're on it, because now we're here, we might as well just get into it. We owe queer liberation to Black and brown trans women. Okay, like this whole everything we have, this whole movement, this month, these corny little rainbow outfits they sell at Target, all of that is thanks to Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson. Like we owe them everything. So like, how dare, you know what I mean? Like, how dare, like the audacity. I think what happens is like within marginalized communities, we often replicate the power structures that have oppressed us from outside communities as well. And so this is how like the patriarchy plays out. This is how like white supremacy plays out. Like all these things somehow like trickle down into our communities. And so because it's easy to push trans people further outside of like, oh, we're not like them. Like we're queer, but not that queer. That's like, it's so like it's incredibly toxic, but also like I really hope that all of us are examining our internalized like transphobia, internalized misogyny, internalized racism. Like all these things are things you have been fed by by the oppressive power structures outside of our community. So like don't let that trickle in here. Don't let that cause us to push people out that belong here. Like there is no liberation while leaving any of us behind.
Yeah, absolutely.
And she's done. She's off her soapbox now. She said it.
I could just listen. You could keep going. I'd be happy with that.
You teed me up. I had to just.
I remember being a little kid watching PBS and was Fannie Lou Hamer said there's no liberation for all of us. I'm mangling it, but
there's no liberation for any of us without liberation for all of us. Like this is how I feel about like all marginalized people, but like I've been having a lot of conversations about what's going on in Gaza right now, and like this is not the point of the conversation, but I do just want to say that like anytime like one of our comrades, like it doesn't matter like race, gender, sexuality, like somebody who is oppressed, and like that is always going to be tied to my liberation. It's going to be tied to your liberation, all of ours. And so like I just believe that it's like all of our responsibility to like stand 10 toes down in that all the time, So anyway, I'm glad you brought that up, Tom.
Yeah, complacency is a poison, and I think it's something that I see in the When You Get the Chance, which is the book that I just released last month with my friend Robin Stevenson. It's about two teens who are trying to get to Toronto Pride Festival. And my character, I very deliberately wrote as a 17-year-old white, athletic, cisgendered, able-bodied gay teen. And he's not very likable. It's something I see in the community, the sort of toxic masculinity that has bled into a certain corner of the gay community, and it's not really talked about the way that it should be. And frustratingly for me, because I think people have a certain expectation of what they want their gay teen YA protagonist to be, I've been getting more pushback than I expected. He has a positive arc. He comes out the other end having learned a few things, but he's still not perfect. But I was actually quite surprised at how many people said, oh, wait, hold on. He's not a sweet little cinnamon roll. What's going on here? But the truth is, there are a lot of complacent people in the community, and I think we all owe it to ourselves and to the wider community to kind of recognize and to grapple with the problems internally that we've allowed to kind of sneak in here.
That is so, I'm so glad you said that. Like, that's really, I think like that's part too of like writing queer YA, something that I've been in the game for like 2 seconds, so like, you know, take this with a grain of salt. But like something that I've recognized, you know, in the past like 2 years or so is that like queer people get two options. Like queer characters get two options. You either have a trauma tragedy narrative where somebody's gonna get hate crimed and maybe not be alive at the end of the book, or you have to be infallible, without flaw, precious, adorable, so sweet. Like, and a lot of this has to do with fetishization, which like is a whole nother conversation. But like at the end of the day, like queer people make mistakes. Like we're messed up too. And if you don't start from a place of like needing growth, what are we doing here? What is the book if there's no growth towards the end? So yeah, look, I'm all for messy, messed up YA, like queer YA protagonists.
Yeah, it makes for a more interesting character arc.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
I totally agree.
And Rebecca says, I'm here for all the books that Leah is repping in queer YA lit. And O added, it can be really powerful to write a flawed gay character. Thank you, Tom, for challenging those expectations. And that kind of segues into a question also asked on you, Tom. But again, both of you can contribute to anything I ask. But as you said, the two main gay cousins in your book, Mark and Talia, both want to go to Toronto Pride, but they both have different views on what being gay and what being queer and within the social culture means. And that's kind of challenged when they meet two sets of other characters, an older lesbian couple, Shirley and Babs, and then an older gay couple, Derek and Kenny. And then they go to both the Dyke March in Toronto, that is the more kind of queer liberation march, and then they go to the more mainstream Toronto Pride. And it's just very interesting seeing the talks between them that go from kind of very on their opposite polar sides, and then they start learning from each other.
Yeah, so I wrote this book with my very good friend, Robin Stevenson, who actually, not to get too deep into the weeds, but in 2010, I moved to the West Coast from the Canadian East Coast. That's when I started writing YA, and I actually took a class that was being offered at the local university, writing and publishing for young adults, and Robin was one of the teachers. So we met, we hit it off, we started kind of a writing friendship, and for the 2 years that I lived there, we would get together for a coffee or a beer every once in a while. And when I moved back to the East Coast, we missed each other, we missed hanging out. So she texted me out of the blue one day and said, we should write a big queer Canadian YA novel together. And we're both in our 40s, and we both have been writing for and about queer teens for a while. So it seemed like a no-brainer to write something together. And really early on in that process, we decided that we wanted our characters. She wrote Talia's chapters and I wrote Mark's chapters. We wanted to write, own voices is a problematic expression these days. There's a lot of stuff going on with own voices, but from the purest way to look at it, we wanted to write characters who kind of reflected our own background so that we could kind of stay in our lane. But we also wanted there to be a big, wide, diverse cast of lots and lots of queer characters. We wanted, non-binary, polyamories in there. We wanted lots of characters just to kind of reflect the big queer communities that we know and that we're associated with. And one thing that was important to both of us is that we wanted there to be some talk of generations and of queer elders. Because that's something that I haven't seen very much of in queer YA. And so we did create these two characters. They're older, they're in their 50s and 60s. And they've had, they've been around the block. These are people who existed and were out and were, fighting for their realities and for their identities when it was a lot more difficult to do that. And, we tried not to be too overbearing or didactic with it. We wanted these characters to be fun and interesting and, well-rounded people, but we thought it was really important to get their perspectives into the book. And they ended up being among the most fun characters I've written because partly because I was getting to write about somebody maybe closer to my own age, but also because I think we forget sometimes that queer history goes back to the beginning of human history. And we can sometimes get kind of caught up in our day-to-day realities. What's my struggle? What's my story? And by bringing these characters into the book, we were able to, shine a light back a few decades to the early days of, There's some discussion of Stonewall, that kind of thing. So yeah, they were really fun characters to write, and a lot of people are responding to them, which is great.
Awesome. Leah, so Liz and Mac, they're the core couple in your novel. They spark with you immediately, but I really like that you built them with a slew of honest conflicts. They have different racial and class experiences. They have different comfort levels with their sexuality in the greater community and society that they live in. And you let both of the characters make really honest human mistakes.
Thank you. Yeah. Look, kids mess up, adults mess up, but kids do a lot of messing up, and it's really dumb. Like, I'm talking like really foolish mistakes. Like, why would you do that kind of stuff? But because when you're 16, 17 years old, that's what you do. Like, you obfuscate things, you sort of like, you think that not telling somebody something is going to be the way to protect them or keep it from hurting even more if you were to tell them. And so it felt like the thing to do was to throw obstacles in their way that are, for me as an adult, frustrating, but like as a teenager, like that's how all my relationships went. They were a mess. But that said, the first draft of You Should See Me in a Crown, Mac was just like the coolest, like most perfect love interest I could have written, and I was just like, yeah, that's fine. Liz deserves that. She deserves somebody perfect. Like, why wouldn't she? She works hard. You should have somebody who you don't have to ever fight with. And my editor was like, Leah, that's literally not how books work. There has to be some sort of conflict here. This is a love story. And so that's when I had to start thinking a little more critically about, like, okay, well, if you have somebody who has never had to be closeted, who was raised in a big city with parents who like took them to Pride every year and like went to PFLAG meetings, like, of course, like she's gonna have a way different relationship to her sexuality than Liz, who is growing up in like a really small conservative town, would have. And so I thought, like, okay, so that has to be a core issue between the two of them. But also, like, Mac is white. Like, there is a difference between the way that, you know, white folks experience queerness and, you know, people of color experience queerness. And so it felt like an opportunity for me to slide some like Kimberly Crenshaw intersectionality into the book and like, you know, talk about critical race theory, talk about like some, you know, more complex things under the guise of like a fluffy love story. So yeah, I'm glad you said that. Thank you. That's cool. It was really important to me.
Oh yeah, it really touched me too that, you know, like I said, even, you know, kids they make some mistakes. They think maybe not revealing everything is a good thing in the moment, but even at the same time, Liz was doing that. What she thought was best was to protect everybody in her family, in her friend network. And, you know, like, I don't want to spoil anything, but, you know, it's that whole thing where at a certain point, you know, she realizes that she's trying to protect everyone at once, and it's eventually gonna, you know, give herself a moment to breathe.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's tough, you know, because I think in any book, but primarily in, you know, romances, which are what I write, you are trying to put two characters together. Like the ultimate goal is that like whatever we do, they're supposed to end up together. But before you end up with somebody else, you have to end up with yourself. And so like Liz's arc then had to be, you know, intertwined with this relationship, but also like be able to stand on its own. And so yeah, I hoped that would be how it felt to read her. So thanks.
I'm going to remember that quote for the rest of my life. Before you end up with somebody else, I can think of the pep talks I'm going to give people using that down the road. Love it.
Wow, thank you. You know what? Honestly, everybody who has friends who are having relationship issues, drop it in your group chat. It's yours.
Oh, and okay. O commented on what Leah had said before about queer characters having two options: drama/tragedy narrative or flawless/precious sweet, and that Tom's point of because of the AIDS crisis, ageism, and other factors, it can feel hard to connect to queers in other generations. And thank you for exploring that and sharing your perspective on that.
Wow. Yeah.
So Tom, and we talked a bit about it a bit earlier, but the way you highlighted the different generational differences and the different kind of clashes between Mark and Talia, where initially Mark is very kind of big-headed on pronoun usage, with Talia's hopeful, not former friend Aaron, and the way that Mark kind of has a awakening moment of, you know, I actually do have this white privilege. I have this able-bodied male privilege that I've never had to think about before. And the fact that he kind of initially tries to argue, like, well, but I'm gay too. I've experienced discrimination too.
Yeah.
It's like, but there's other layers that you don't have to walk through the world through. You only have maybe one, where other people have three or more.
Yeah, I mean, if we don't talk about intersectionality, or if we don't bring that into the conversation, we're doing everybody a disservice. We're doing ourselves a disservice. We're certainly doing our readers a disservice. And, you know, it can be really complicated when you're trying to write a character with sort of an ulterior motive, which in some cases, this character, Mark, I wanted him to be a real, authentic character, and I wrote him the way I write all of my main characters, which is I try to imagine somebody real and work outwards from there. But at the same time, I did have a few things I wanted to say about, you know, some trends I was noticing within the, you know, particularly the cisgender white gay male community, and so I had to kind of walk a balance where I didn't want to make the guy detestable, but I also wanted to kind of bring these issues to the forefront through the character. And I think that it can be a bit of a shock to the system for some people who've lived a really sheltered existence, who've led a charmed existence, and feel like, oh, well, you know, this is sort of the thing that he tries to get across as, well, I'm gay. Things are very difficult for me too. But Talia, his much more socially conscious cousin, has to basically take him aside a few times and say, you need to understand there's more to this struggle than just what you might think of from your own, you know, very rarefied identity bubble. Because I think it's an important message. And I mean, I think anybody who writes YA really gets kind of queasy when you talk about message books. If you go into a book trying to write a message, then you know you're walking in really dangerous territory. So I tried to strike a balance where this stuff came across naturally through the dialogue, and he did have a bit of a story arc that kind of brought him to some more awareness. But clearly, at the end of the book, he still has a long way to go, which I think is the more human reality. You can't change somebody's perspective on the world overnight. It just doesn't happen. But you can point people in the right direction and hope that they begin to have some insights on their own and gradually grow as people. I think that's the more natural way to approach things. I think it's the more realistic way, realistic expectation to have of people. So, you know, hopefully I pulled that off in the book.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Leah, for talking about the ways that queer experience differs with race and other axes of oppression. And it is a very important topic to bring light to.
Thank you.
So I was also curious, Leah, about the relationship you wrote between between Liz and her brother Robbie and her friend Jordan, that she has a really strong bond with both of them that is sometimes tested, with your younger brother Robbie fighting sickle cell anemia, the same disease that their mother died of, and then the way that Jordan is always kind of a bit of a have no worries, no cares character. Did you mean to have Leah kind of be a forced into the older sister, more like wiser friend role, and how she learns to like kind of break out of that?
Yeah, so especially like her relationship with her little brother was really important to me to spend some time with, because I think for another thing that I like grew up with in YA were like pretty cookie cutter like family structures. Like you have a mom, you have a dad, you have one sibling, maybe, and they're all like you live under the same roof, you eat dinner together, you have a dog, maybe you go on family vacations. Like I read a lot of like rich white girl books. Like if you couldn't tell, like I love like Sarah Dessen growing up. Like it didn't, I think those books like got more complicated as like time went on, but like in the beginning it's pretty straightforward. And so one of the things that was really important to me was to show a sort of non-traditional family situation, which is that Liz and Robbie are not being raised by their parents, they're being raised by their grandparents. And because of that, Liz has to take on a great deal of responsibility, because she doesn't want to be a burden to her grandparents, because she knows that her grandparents have already done so much for them. And I think that's the case probably for a lot of teenagers, probably definitely for a lot of teenagers, is that, you know, especially if you're the oldest daughter, you inherit a lot of jobs. You are a child rearer, you are not just the daughter, but you're also the babysitter and the housekeeper and the chef. And so yeah, Liz has internalized a lot of those responsibilities. And I think, you know, towards the end of the book, her grandmother is like, Liz, take it easy, kiddo. Like, you're a kid. Like, this is my job. I'll take this on. But, you know, it was just, it was really important to me because it felt true to like what I knew growing up, is that like, your parents don't just do their job on their own. Like when you're the oldest, you also are like trying to help them do their job, unless you're like having your teen rebellion phase, in which case like there's no accounting for what you might do. But yeah, and then there's Jordan, who is like biracial, but he's light skinned. And so like the way that he's able to navigate that space in their small town is way different than Liz, who is like brown skin and poor. And so I think like that is like a conflict between the two of them. Also, I wanted to not write an issue novel like Tom said, but like, you know, make those things sort of emerge naturally as the story went along.
Yeah, it's a light touch.
Thanks. Thank you. Also, I love Jordan. I should say I love Jordan, and I like wrote a short story with Jordan for like a pre-order thing for my next book, and it was so much fun to sit with him for a while, because bless his heart, he's sweet. He's a sweet kid, but oh my God, he is so dense. I love him.
He means the best walking on clouds, but yeah.
Truly. Yeah.
Both of you actually have like really wonderful grandma characters. I love that both of the grandmothers in your books love their queer grandkids unequivocally. And I don't know if I was reading too much into it, but was it kind of a nudge to maybe older generations that, you know, despite whatever, this seems untraditional, this isn't the way things were back then, but, you know, this not a message, but
yeah, I just love grandmas. I love grandmas. I think they're the best. Like I'm like very passionate about grandmothers and aunts. Like the cool aunt who like travels the world, doesn't have any kids, but like flies in on the holidays and like gives gifts with her like cool fur coat, and then she hops back on a flight to Paris the next day. You know, like very specifically those types of like adult figures I'm obsessed with.
Yeah, I respond to that. I hope to be that kind of uncle. So I get that, because I have no intention of having kids of my own, but I have a lot of nieces and nephews, and I want to be the fun, you know, show up with the best gifts every year, that kind of thing. My grandma, so the grandma in the book was quite different from my grandmother. I was really close to my grandmother. She lived to 99 and 9 months, and she died about 10 years ago. But she was a very old school Catholic. She never knew I was gay. Who knows how that would have gone down? Probably not super well. But, you know, I loved her, and she had a big impact on my life when I was growing up. And very different person from the grandma in my book. But I don't know. I think that in When You Get the Chance, we did really want to talk about generations from all sorts of different angles. Like there's the queer elders, but then there are also the elders in your family and the things you learn from the people that came before you. Everybody has people in their lives, whether it's family members or, you know, mentors that you pick up along the way, who kind of show you what it's like to be the adult that you're going to be someday. And those are really important people. And at a certain point, when you're young, you kind of take it for granted, but you get to a certain point as you start to push through adulthood where you really start to kind of honor that. And, you know, hopefully we'll be honored in the same way sometime down the road. So that's kind of where that comes from.
Cool. Rebecca has a question. To both of you, do you read any queer YA graphic novels? And how do those inform this blossoming literary culture? And it looks like Leah is ready to answer.
I am. I'm very passionate about this. You want to know why? Because I just recently got into queer graphic novels and they have taken over my entire life. It's all I care about. It's all I want to talk about. So let me tell you, I'm going to make a couple recommendations. One, The Girl in the Sea by Molly Knox Ostertag. Adorable, so sweet, heartwarming, obsessed with it. Incredible. Also the Check Please graphic novels, like about a hockey, like this little like sweet guy like goes to college, he plays hockey, he falls in love. Amazing. I'm obsessed. Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me is another one of my recent faves. I think that like whatever brings readers to the table, whatever you can do to like get people to read, I absolutely think that is like the highest form of art. Like that is like, it doesn't get better than that to me. And so like graphic novels are, for a lot of people, way more accessible than like sitting down and reading a 75,000 word you know, traditional prose novel. And so I think that not only do graphic novels open the door to readers who like may otherwise not be interested in storytelling in this particular medium, but also like the way like bringing in a visual element into a narrative is able to sort of change the way you metabolize a story. It just means a lot to me. I'm like, I can't speak highly enough of like queer graphic novels and what they're doing for the genre right now.
And
Rebecca,
skill.
you feel me? You feel me?
I can't even. I mean, I love graphic novels generally. I have read Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me, and I loved it. But the
also
skill,
so beautiful. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh.
To be able to take a story. I mean, I find it complicated enough to write a story, but to write it and portray it visually, I can't even get around that kind of talent. So, and there's so many great people working in the form these days. So. Good stuff.
It's something we really try to impart on parents at the library. You know, if they scoff at the graphic novels, we're like, even if, you know, it's a gateway at least, you know. And like you said, Leah, the way both the written and the visual clues into different sides of their brains and different parts of creativity. But if nothing else, parents, it is a gateway to get your kids to love reading. So let them read as many graphic novels as they want.
Yeah, like a book is a book is a book is a book. You know what I mean? Like what we're trying to do is tell stories. What we're trying to do is like, you know, make windows and doors. And so I think like those things are created regardless of what medium your reader is engaging with. And not for nothing, but there's a reason why so many like incredibly popular like YA novels get adapted into graphic novels. Jason Reynolds, I think, has done this multiple times now. With his books, because what we're trying to do is like give this book to more and more people. And so like, yeah, let's throw some let's do some pictures. Like let's bring some illustrations in here. Let's bring in some other forms of art. I'm obsessed is what I'm saying. I'm obsessed, and this is my whole personality now. It's talking about queer graphic novels.
Well, if there are any illustrators out there, you know, if you want to shoot either Leah or Tom an adaptation suggestion,
I would love that.
Right.
And Rebecca also recommends Snapdragon by Kate Lee.
Oh my gosh, so I just sent this to my editor. I did a panel with Molly Knox Ostertag yesterday, which is also why I'm obsessed with her. And I said this to my editor via email, and she was like, "Oh, if this is your whole thing now, then you need to read Snapdragon." So Rebecca, I'm literally going to order it off a bookshop as soon as we get off this call. Thank you for that like validation.
Okay. So I was also for both of you as well, you both highlighted like the two big key milestones, prom and pride. And we've definitely seen a like kind of seismic shift with the younger LGBTQ generation being able to go to prom openly with their queer partners. And then we've seen over the years various younger generations experiencing their first prides. And now I think in more recent years, they've also changed and challenged the kind of set concept of what pride was solidifying into. And what do both of you think the future of is for queer teens for both prom and or pride?
It's a great question. I hope we could, I kind of said this earlier, but I hope that, you know, inclusivity almost, I just hope we continue to move to more and more inclusivity and a lack of judgment in society overall. I'd like to see, you know, if a teen wants to go to the prom with whatever person that they would like to go to the prom with, I'd like that to happen without even the remotest possibility that someone's going to give them side eye for it. I want people to feel open. I want young people especially to feel open and comfortable and happy in their own skin. And you know, if we can get to that point, then I think we're doing something right.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, you know, I remember back when I used to read reviews for You Should See Me in a Crown, which you stop doing pretty quickly, actually, when your first book comes out.
Stay away from Goodreads.
Right, it's not really the place for authors to hang out. But when I used to read reviews, something that popped up often was like, "Oh, this is so unrealistic. Like, these traditions are so exaggerated and dramatic, and like, there's no way this stuff really happens anymore." And I always found that to be a really strange like critique, because one, like, I'm from the Midwest, like maybe it doesn't exist this way elsewhere, but like prom absolutely is a big deal here. And second of all, like every tradition that I pulled for the book like came from a real place. It was like very Atwood-esque in that I was just like, crazy prom traditions, where in history and like where in the country have we messed this up? And so you know, there's still way too many towns and way too many communities wherein you can't dress the way that you would like to dress. You have to buy separate tickets if you're a same you know, gender, sexuality, like whatever couple. You have to wear dresses if you are someone who presents as female. Like, you literally, there are very rigid and specific rules for like how prom functions. And so like one, I want these, like, all of us to acknowledge that, like, yeah, like we've moved forward in a lot of ways, but like this antiquated tradition is still very antiquated. And so I would like to see just like basics, just like simple things. Like, I would like to see girls not have to wear gowns at prom, because I know for one, I would have looked great in a suit at prom. And so now that I know that, like, I would love to see like very simple, but like when you're a teenager, like those things are massive. And so, yeah, I believe that there is a future in which like those things are possible. But first we have to acknowledge that like they're not happening everywhere.
Yeah. We need to stop telling young people, especially, that there's a right way and a wrong way to be a person. It's just that's what's getting in our way, and the more restrictive these kinds of policies are, the more damaging it is. I mean, it stays with people who are traumatized because of these kinds of messages.
Yeah, absolutely. It takes a long time to unlearn those things. So I feel that.
Yeah. So we are about time on wrapping up. I just want to shout out the PG County Library System is having an event in collaboration with the LGBTQ Dignity Project on Sunday, June 27th from 2 to 6 p.m. Pride in Prince George's County, Pride in the Park. If you go to our website, pgcmls.info, and the events page, You can sign up for that. It is a family event that PGC MLS staff will be tabling at, and it will be in College Park, Maryland, at Duval Field, 9200 Rhode Island Avenue, College Park, Maryland, 20740. So feel free to go to our event page and check that out. And I want to thank Tom and Leah so much for having this talk and chat with us today. And are there any parting words or any future book shout outs you both want to do before we go?
I mean, thank you so much for having us. This was really a pleasure. If you liked listening to me talk and you like stories about queer Black girls falling in love, then pick up Rise to the Sun, which is out on July 6th
Awesome.
at a bookseller near you, or request it from your local library. That also is incredibly important.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks a million. It was great. You did a great job, Chris and Leah. It was really a pleasure to meet you and chat with you. And happy Pride, everyone.
Yeah. Happy Pride, y'all.
Yeah, happy Pride. Black Trans Lives Matter. And you can pick up both Leah and Tom's books through PGC MLS library system, and also with Loyalty Books, our book partner in Silver Spring, Maryland, and Petworth, DC.